I want to introduce our panelists. We have 5 panelists today. Kelly Allison is our first panelist. Look behind you, Kelly. Richard Stout. Lynn Randolph, it was impossible to find a good picture of you, find a picture of you from back in the day. This is a photograph of a printout of an iPhone photo of a photocopy of a newspaper article. Earl Staley. Marilyn Oshman. Marilyn, who are you with in this picture? This is the demolition of the building to make way for the Contemporary Arts Museum across the street. Well, so I want to start by asking Marilyn a question, and this is kind of an open-ended question, but, oh, no, I take it back. I'm going to ask Richard the first question. Richard, my question to you is that maybe you could give us a little bit of a sense of the nature of what the scene was like when you began painting here in the mid-'50s and into the '60s, to set a little bit of a context for this, and how provincial of a scene was it, what was it like, and how did things change as the city continued to grow? And if you all could make sure to speak into the microphones.
Okay.
And you can take them out of the holders also.
I think probably the thing that struck me when I first came here, and because I've been looking around for a place to settle for a while, was the quality of the things that were already here. The Mies van Roo building at the Museum of Fine Arts, the Contemporary Arts Museum with the quality exhibitions by Germaine McCaggy, such a collection at the readily available at the Menil Home, St. Thomas University with the Philip Johnson buildings, Leopold Stokowski in the orchestra, a new opera company, all very, very exciting, wonderful young architects in the city, and the program, particularly at the Museum of Fine Arts and the University of Houston, in the visual arts that at Museum of Fine Arts, run by Lowell Collins, who hired me in '58. A number of bright young artists who were in Houston at the time. To me, they were very bright. They were 5-10 years older than I was, but people like Jack Boynton and Jim Love, wonderful people to be around all the time. The thing that I noticed the most about Houston as opposed to Chicago and New York was the fact that we were so easily all of a same group with very different points of view, and everyone was very happy that we had company. The teaching at the Museum of Fine Arts was the normal sort of thing that you might see in a situation like that in a museum. But there was an aim to have better quality teachers. Ruth Laird in ceramics couldn't get much better, and I felt as I was in very high cotton when Lowell hired me to teach there with Henry and Leela and Stella and so many Henry and Leela here today. And then when I went to the University of Houston to work there in the department, which had already done a great work with Paul Maxwell, actually hosting a painter, hosting the first arts program for our public television station from the University of Houston. And so it was a great place to be. I think that the first thing we need to thank here in Houston are the teachers in the city that were able to get a lot of people like Terrell James and just to name a few, moved in the direction to explore in a very serious way the visual world.
And how easy or difficult was it to be an artist in Houston during that time period?
You didn't make any money from selling your art. You were happy that you were able to show. And there were enough really interesting galleries in town that you could show in. Ben Dubose, everyone loved Ben Dubose. He was very generous in giving exhibitions, very pleasant to be around. The other galleries that surfaced all during these times after the Second War, in particular in the 50s. Meredith Long, Philippe Reichenbach, briefly with good work. Catherine Swenson's New Arts Gallery, Joan Crystal's Louisiana Gallery, Marjorie Kaufman, et cetera, et cetera. A lot energetic, hardworking people. I think it was good. We all went to everyone's exhibition. This is what we did. This is what people in Houston did. People in Houston supported the arts because we didn't have Malibu, we didn't have the ski slopes, so we were stuck here reading, looking at art, and listening to music. It's true.
Well, Marilyn, I'll move over to you. You went to New York to go to school, and you were exposed to a wider world of art up there. And then you came back to Houston and became involved with the art scene here as an administrator. And I wonder if you could tell me, well, first as a volunteer, and as a volunteer.
I still am a volunteer.
Well,
I'm still a volunteer.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your experiences coming back to Houston and getting involved with the Contemporary Arts Museum, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Jim as a director. I will leave it very open-ended, and you can take this question in any way you want.
Well,
And you can
it was over a long period of time, so there's lots of things to say, but the first thing I would say is I was a volunteer when we were in the old building, and I would just go over there and do little random things. And my first major experience with the Contemporary Arts Museum, this should have been a signal, but I didn't get it, was that one day I was over there filing cards with the assistant director, who was Margaret Prince at the time. And Lefty Adler was our director, but he wasn't in. And these three hippies came into the museum, and literally this was 1969, maybe, yes, 1969. And they came into the museum, and they were in torn clothes, and their hair was long and stringy, and they came in and they kind of aggressively said that they wanted to see the director. So I just said, well, the director is not here. Well, is the assistant director here? And so I went into this woman, Margaret Prince's office, and I said, Margaret, would you see these three men say they want to see you? So she said, she looked at him, she said, no, I don't want to see him. So I said, well, okay. So I went outside and I said, okay, well, she can't see you, she's busy. And they said, well, what about you? And I said, okay, well, what do you want to show me? Well, those three men turned out to be the ant farm. And they brought their first slides. They had gotten a job at the University of Houston teaching, and they wanted to show their slides. And the slides that they showed that day were of all of the parachutes that they had, were blowing fans into and blowing up and turning them into houses or tents or sleeping bags or whatever. But anyway, that day, for me, I ended up becoming great pals with them, and I just found out after coming home from New York to just be a volunteer would be quite enough. If you went to the museum and you kind of were nice and said hello to everybody. There's no telling who you were going to meet, and it really was a changing life event. So for me, right from the beginning, I had a great experience there, and the ant farm turned out, for those of you who don't know, they did do Cadillac Ranch. They had many ideas. They didn't get to express very many of them, but in their way they did. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, after that 10 opening, the board was convinced that we needed to get a new director. And I was on the search committee, and I had been made the president of the board, the youngest person on the board, who was too stupid to know that when you're broke, you don't have a director, you don't become the president of a board, because you don't know what you're doing. And I did not know what I was doing. But I did go up with another woman, and I did hear this man named James Harithas speak at the American Museums Association meeting. And after all the people we had talked about, I thought he was the most interesting speaker. And he spoke of all things. His topic was censorship. He's here today, and he may remember this. But anyway, I said to the woman I was with, now that's the man we need to talk to. And I remember going up to him. There was a lot of people around. And I went up to him, and I tried to get his attention. He just turned around and walked the other way. So I didn't know how we'd ever get his number or anything, but I brought his name back to Houston and talked to somebody. And this man was Meredith Long. Meredith said, oh my goodness, I'll get him down here. You think he's good? We'll get him down here and we'll interview him. And that's how it happened. And it was a wonderful moment for Houston, because all the people who are in this room, if Jim had not helped create, not helped, but created himself this idea that the people who live in this city, that our community is loaded with really gifted people, and we need to acknowledge them and make them part of something, and that foundation will lead to great things for everybody. And he, with all the crazy things we talk about, but that one thing was the guiding principle of everything that happened there. So it was wonderful. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah. Lynn, I want to ask you to maybe speak to that a bit also, because you and I have had some conversations about the extent to which Jim supported you as an artist, and we've also had a bit of a conversation with respect to this book about making sure that the sensationalism of some of the things that happened during the era doesn't undercut what Marilyn was just talking about, Jim being the kind of figure who supported local artists in a way that they hadn't been supported before. And I wonder if you could say something a bit about the way that he encouraged you as an artist, and maybe even put it in a wider context of what was going on at the time. And if you could speak into the mic, I know we don't have enough to go around. And you can take those out of the holders.
Well, first of all, I'd really like to say, and in fact, Jim Harithas just said to me, in a sense, you don't have, it's hard to have a culture if you don't have a history. And what Pete is trying to do, and what everyone sitting here today is a part of, is a history that is very important to the city and to the future and to the cultural growth and awareness of the city. So thank you for your efforts. I think we're all in your gratitude for bringing us together and for understanding that that's important. You don't have a culture if you don't have artists living and working in that culture. If you don't have writers, if you don't have musicians, if you don't have thinkers, if you don't have every form of art there is and all the other forms that exist with it. You can have those, but not have anyone see them or recognize that they're going on. And it's very important to understand that in a city, just as a kind of introduction, that we put some of this in context, that Houston in 1972 was becoming very, very wealthy. And what we did was certainly a part of that, and a very dramatic part of it, and affected our lives and the rest of the city. But I think we have to also understand that we had David Gockley coming to the opera, that we had Jim Blue at the Media Center, that Jim Clouser, some of them, the board at the ballet didn't stick with Clouser, but he was so original and innovative. There was a moment when the people and that generation of board members was not closed down, that Houston was a really open city, and they would take chances, great risks in the 70s that weren't really taken earlier in a way. Part of what we got was the excitement of all these people. Glenn Camber started the Houston Galveston Psychoanalytic Institute during these years. That has permeated the whole city and many people's lives in the same way. It was the most extraordinary time to be here, and we were beneficiaries of that. Jim Harithas came to us, and Marilyn recognized it immediately. I think many of us did. He's brilliant. He knows art. To be a young artist and to have that man come and talk to me about art and want me to argue with him about it, which I did endlessly, but that doesn't happen in every artist's life. He went into studios, he went across the state, and he was open, and he understood that everybody wasn't like on the same level, but he wanted you to grow. He wanted you to be a part of things. I remember a morning he came in my studio and he slammed the first this magazine. It was the first edition of Heresies, the first feminist magazine. And he had been in New York and he saw it, and there was an article in it by Carol Duncan, and he thought I needed to read it. Now, nobody else is going to come in. It's like, Mars coming in a way. It was for many of us, and even for those that weren't as close, the excitement and his courage, and to stand up and say the art being made here is as good as art being made anywhere, and we're essentially going to have an art community. He was behind that whole Houston Museum of Modern Art that started in Alexander's studio that was a laundromat, and it didn't last very long, but all these things grew out of the generosity of spirit of this person who, he hit Houston like Carla, like a hurricane. He hasn't stopped. He has the conscience, the values. He does and always has done work that was cutting edge. Today, the station is the most exciting place in the city, in my mind. And this is something else I really have to say, that all of history and everything that everyone says is an interpretation. Everyone has their own interpretation of what happened and their role in it. And it's hard. You don't want any voices neglected, because it was a lot more than one person.
Thank you, Lynn. Earl, I'm going to ask you next, because in the overview that I have presented of my work, of course, I'm leaving a lot of things out. I'm giving just the broadest possible picture of what it is that I'm writing. And I have focused a lot on the CAM because I feel like it is a way to put things in perspective and a chronological narrative, because so much was happening there. But I am also writing in this book extensively about things that happened at the Rice Media Center and the Houston Museum of Modern Art that Lynn just mentioned, and also on the campus of the University of St. Thomas. And I wondered if you might be able to tell us just a little bit about the nature of the program there that was something brand new that was organized at the end of the 60s. And you had a different kind of student there that might have attended Rice or the University of Houston. And you actually did a lot of groundbreaking things with these students. And I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about what that was like.
Well, I always think of the time when I first got here, which was in '66, that I was part of a very small group of artists, and I was probably the youngest one and the only one that came from someplace other than Texas, which was a big change for me coming out of Chicago area and arriving here and finding something thriving. It was thriving already. And it was very nice to find a welcoming place. I had been teaching at St. Louis at Washington University, and it was still getting over Mr. Beckman. Max had been there, and they were still dealing with Beckman, who was a big influence on me also. But it was a done place. I got here, and I guess Sweeney was still here, and there was a huge Georgie O'Keeffe show at the museum. It was beautiful. It's like, whoa! And everything. And then the first day I was here, I went to an opening at Kiko Gallery, and that was wonderful. So I saw a very open, and not many artists, very few. But my tenure at St. Thomas began after Rice and I departed. I started teaching at Rice. And being young and rash, I didn't quite know the politics of Rice. So thank goodness they got rid of me, and the Neimanills moved from St. Thomas to Rice, and Jack Boynton and Pat Colville and myself moved over to St. Thomas and began a studio program there, which they'd never had before. And I had this amazing group of people, all these young men, all long hippie characters, because they were all in St. Thomas to escape the war. So during the war years, we had a huge amount of, within a year or two, first of all, I was a part-time teacher, and then they wanted a full-time within a semester. So they asked my two senior members, Jack and Pat, if they wanted to do that, and they said, no, we don't want to be full-time. I did, so I became department chairman. And it was like, whoa! And then the student body just got larger and larger and larger until we had the biggest major in the whole school. And so we started doing things. And I think now the things we did at St. Thomas, we couldn't possibly do anymore because you got to go through committees and all these questions. And I think, my God, now he'd put us in jail. But we had a great time. But we did it very unknown. We had very little, well, first they built a new library and they gave us the old library building, which gave us an enormous exhibition space and big, huge open studio spaces, which we made use of. And so I was associated with Bob Camblin and Joe Tate. We had a studio down the street on Sulross. We were called the Holding Firm. And the ideas that Bob and Joe and I put together, we were able to put on at St. Thomas and draw in the community of artists here or my students. So we did a lot of events there. So the events at University of Houston were one place and St. Thomas was in the other. We were very small and U of H was very large. But we had a great time doing this. We did camping trip shows. I take my students out camping in Flatona. Thank God nobody died. And we bring back artwork and put it in the gallery. And then we had, before that, Bob and I did a number of shows at the old David Gallery called the Tattoo Show, where we had a tattoo booth set up. And local artists were all asked to design tattoo paintings. And people came to the opening and got tattoos, and we had people walking around naked with tattoos on. It was great fun. And then we had a number of shows like that before Diane David closed down. But it was a good time And it's all times of good times and bad times. You live with what you have. So I had great things happening with me then at St. Thomas. St. Thomas died out after the war died. As soon as the war was over, the students were gone. I think my last classes there were mainly of young ladies from South America who were sent to St. Thomas for a Catholic education out of the wars. So I left St. Thomas and went to Rome for 4 years. So your span of time here in '83 is when I was in Italy, and it begins while we were in our heyday at St. Thomas. So a lot of things that were going on at St. Thomas were like hybrids. Like what was happening at U of H was entirely different from what I was doing at St. Thomas, and we really had very little contact. So it was like Lawndale was over there and St. Thomas was over here, and all of a sudden we were in a way of rivalry, and there's always rivalry among the artists. Thank goodness now we've forgiven each other. The older you get, the more you forgive. You say, no, it's okay, it's okay. I know, it was nice. So.
Thanks, Earl. Hey, Kelly. I wonder if you could talk a bit about coming to Houston and how you got involved with the U of H art department and what life was like at Lawndale when it was first getting going.
Okay, is this all right? First of all, let me say it is really an honor to sit up here with these distinguished panelists. They are heroes of my heroes, and I think what Lynn was talking about, Harithas, speaking about Houston, artists could be as good as artists anywhere, that permeated down to people who were my heroes, who permeated down, I think, within my generation, and I hope we're passing it on. I came to Houston in 1978, and I wasn't sure of the dates here, but the fire show was 1979. I came from a very small town. It was the first museum show I've ever seen in my life. So it was very powerful to me, very meaningful. I had just moved from Baylor University, Waco, and landed down in the heart of the Montrose looking for hippies, of course. And had gone down to the Gourmet Burger, and in front of me at Gourmet Burger were two gentlemen who were literally sparks flying from them. And it was John Alexander and James Surls. And they were speaking about this space. This was going to be this space. Something had burned down, and something was going to be great. And, you know, I was just hearing bits and pieces of it, but I knew then I had to be a part of it, whatever it was. Luckily, I had able to get into the University of Houston, and it was just at the time that the old art building had burned down, and we were moving into the new Lawndale. For about the first 5 weeks of class, we got notes on the door that said, "It'll be here, we're coming." And finally one day, we met over at this building in the middle of the winter. We were huddled in the stairwell, and there was probably about 10 undergraduate students, possibly Bert Long and Mary Genowine and me and Craig Lesser, and there was the very first kids. We were really the babies. We waited around, and eventually one of the teachers came and let us in. It might have been you, Richard. I'm not real sure who it was, but they opened the door, and suddenly there was just vast, as far as you could see, yellow, 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 yellow walls everywhere. But it was just this enormous warehouse space, and we had just been told, this is yours. This is yours to do whatever you want to, think of the possibilities. And I think that's why it was so fantastic, is that the possibilities were endless. The people that came in and inspired us were unbelievable people. I mean, where else can you be 20 years old and have Phillips Glass and the Houston Grand Opera practicing Panther underneath you, and the steel drum band there practicing every other night, and C. Allen Ginsberg and Laurie Anderson, and we were just walking amongst these people like we were equal to them. Hey, bud, what's going on? And we just, you know, it was just an experience that, as the representative of Lawndale here, I cannot possibly tell you how wonderful, how meaningful all of that was. And I owe everything that's ever happened to me in Houston to those Lawndale years and to the people that brought that about, and the sensibilities of James Harithas that brought all of that into being. And one of the things that happened at Lawndale that isn't spoken about as much as the students, and how much the students themselves contributed to the craziness, the enthusiasm, the just no holds barred, let's have a good time, let's make art, let's make history, let's become something. And I teach and I try to be involved with some performance art things and anything that's alternative to this day, because I just want to give back to the kids. I want to give the kids the same opportunity to say, this is yours, do whatever you want to do with it.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, there are 1,000 questions that I could ask and have asked all of you.
I think it's the idea of community the artists had here in the 70s. And one place we had was a place called Chaucer's at the old Plaza Hotel that Jim Harithas began along with Bill Agee. They'd have their lunches there. And then Thursday night became Artist Night. So we'd all go there drinking, and then Artist Night, Thursday night was also Gallery Night. So we'd go out and do the galleries. But Chaucer's was the place where everybody came, and it was our hangout. It was the place to meet artists, to meet visiting artists. So it was a social place, which it happened then for a few years, and it's never happened again. First of all, there's much more of us now, but it was a great place to hang out, meet people outside of the studio and outside of the galleries. Having a drink is always good.
Well, the people that met at the Chaucer bar were all men.
It's not true. Not true.
There were a few.
That's probably right, absolutely right.
And what happened to all the women in all of this was something that changed radically when the International Year of the Woman, it was their second year in Houston. And women, I don't know how, I mean, it was like 20,000 women went to that conference in Houston. And a lot of the women artists in this community went to the meetings and went to the section on art. And we didn't know each other because we hadn't been drinking each other or teaching with each other. A lot of us had children, and we're just trying to make art. We discovered at that meeting there was an organization called the National Women's Caucus for Art that grew out of the College Art Association, and they encouraged us to start a chapter. And somebody called a meeting, and it was at Pat Danko's house in Montrose, and it was packed. And all of us had seen each other's work at various exhibitions around town, on competitive shows, like the Jewish Community Show and other shows. And this was 1977. But we could put a face with the art, and we could begin to talk to each other about our experiences. And I know Martha Terrell left that night, and she said she cried all the way home. And I think many of us felt that way. We were sort of bonded just because we were in similar circumstances. But somehow that organization grew to be not just about us finding our names and our voices, but we process things even differently from a lot of other women's groups. And that would be obvious in the way that we handled, Lance Layler gave us the firehouse, an old firehouse for $1 a year. And there was some discussion of it becoming a gallery for women artists, but the discussion ended up being that it would be a resource for us, not just to put a a painting or a work of art up or on the wall, but a place for us to gather and learn about what was going on in our community, what contributions we could make, how we could go about doing things. That if you invited people in to speak to your group that ran a gallery, ran an alternative space, or a curator, or an art writer, that you would get a better understanding of what your situation was and how you could proceed. It was very important to us to jury our shows so that we weren't a vanity gallery, that we invited jurors to jury the shows that we did that wouldn't appear to that we were just trying to promote each other. We learned that there were always people in a group that'll try to take over a group and use it for their own best interest. And we learned to stand up to that time and time again. It was an amazing experience. In doing that, we challenged, first of all, the Channel 8 art auction because we didn't feel, and the artists in the community, and I also have to say that the women in our group, all of us felt that the men were artists and artists weren't being treated much better or worse than we were in the community, or underrated or underestimated, and that we included men in a lot of the things that we did. The Channel 8 art auction, all of us have been hearing for years. I mean, it made a lot of money for Channel 8, but it didn't treat the work respectfully, and there was no minimum bid. They just slapped your work up in front of a camera, and they might or may not mention your name, and here you were. And we were saying, okay, make the dentist do a free root canal and auction that off, make the other people in the community support Channel 8. Why does it fall on the back of the artists who were paid less than anyone else in the community? Those were the kinds of questions that the Women's Caucus for Art wanted to ask in the community. We challenged the Houston Arts Council. We walked out when they wouldn't elect duly nominated members of our group. And that was a great embarrassment to them. But then they had to look at how they were nominating and perpetuating themselves and the power in the city. Then the biggest thing probably we did was we challenged the Museum of Fine Arts. And we weren't alone in that, but we wrote a letter to the editor of both papers. It was mentioned in the New York Times. Everyone, and all we did was ask questions. We asked questions about their deaccessioning things. We asked questions about, I can't remember all the questions that were asked, but it was that we asked the question about Barbara Rose coming to Houston like one day a week and being paid a huge salary and not being here and not participating in our community. We asked those kinds of questions. They were, well, I mean, that's another whole lecture, but and it's very intense. Mimi Crossley was working for the Houston Post, and Oveda Hobby called, Mrs. George Brown called Mrs. Hobby and said they had to fire Mimi. Mimi had been a great investigative reporter. She had discovered all kinds of shenanigans that were going on that weren't public, and we got well, I don't know, many of you signed the letter that we sent, and it was, very controversial. There was a big to-do on Channel 8. Suzanne Bloom and AG had a discussion, and many of us appeared at the board meeting and asked questions. Why were they deaccessioning all the Latin American art in a truck on the side of the building? And there were a lot of questions to be asked. And it was a time when the artists had enough confidence to stand up and ask a lot of questions, and the caucus did that collectively. And it was everyone in the caucus. There are so many great women in this community that have helped the whole community and helped each other that grew out of that. That culminated in a conference in 1988. It was the National Women's Caucus for Art. And when we started, we did the numbers of the women in galleries, and it was pathetic. But during that conference, Lydia Bodner, Val Hutrak, and Margaret Smithers Trumps took it upon them. They were part of the committee. They went to every gallery. They got every gallery in the city, or I think, I shouldn't say every because I'm not sure it was every one of them. But most of the alternative spaces and the gallery showed women's work during that whole conference. And the conference itself was spectacular. Anyway, that has to be mentioned.
Does anyone here have any questions that they want to raise? And can I give you this mic so that it shows up on the video?
Yeah, sure. First, I want to start off with the fact that when I moved here from New York, Lynn Randolph and James Harithas were the first people that befriended me, and that is a debt I will always owe to both of them. Lynn had a very interesting reading group that met at her house that was artist and Glenn Camber and Terry Duty, and a mixed disciplinary thing that for somebody moving from New York and having been involved in New York and feeling very lost. Those two, Jim and I taught classes back to back at U of H, and that was great. The whole campaign against the museum was very painful for us on the inside, and my reading skills of Mimi Crossley's investigative skills and yours might not agree. But I do want to say something that I think is very pertinent to this discussion, which has to do with Mimi getting fired. It was more interesting to that and more true to Houston, which is two of the most powerful women in Houston, Alice Brown and Mrs. Hobby, Houston Post, old friends. The controversy at the museum was beginning to disrupt Houston River Oaks dinner parties. That was serious. And those two women sat down and they agreed that Mrs. Brown would endow a place for Bill Agee at the Archives of American Art, and Bill would leave. And Mrs. Hobby would give Mimi something she'd always wanted, which would pay for her to get her doctorate in pre-Columbian art at Texas. So neither of them backed down, you understand. Both of them protected their institutions and their person, Mimi versus Bill, and did it in the way that I think is very typical of the way problems in this city are often solved, which is the old tradition of Suite 8F at Rice Hotel. You know, get the powers that be to get together and slice it out. I'm not trying to, you know, dismiss what you all in the petitions were. I'm just saying, those of us on the inside of the museum, it was a very different. I will never forgive Mimi for her headline that read, "Museum takes Rivera out the back door." Well, where the hell else were we going to take the Rivera? You know, it was a twisted kind of attack that was really painful and difficult. But that's a whole nother story. But I do think the point about the trustees is important to make, because it is something that we haven't talked about yet, and especially these women, Miss Cullen, Miss Brown, those, Audrey Beck, those women in this city cannot be underestimated. And one of my favorite stories, I'll just tell you, when they were founding the museum, oh damn it, now I'm going to forget her name, Igloo, they founded Igloo. Anyway, she was one of the women, the 5 women who founded the museum, and she went to somebody for money, and she said, you know, we want to start this museum, we want you to get the money. And he said, I'm not giving to any museum. This is me imitating her. She said, fine, I'll just go home now. What's your favorite charity? Okay, I'll just go home and tell Daddy we can't give to that this year.
Thanks, Anne.
Does anybody else have a comment or a question? I mean, there are people in this audience who could just as easily be on this panel.
I'd like to hear more from the panelists about which exhibitions were the most important to them.
How about that? Which exhibitions were the most important?
I can remember a show that Burt Long did, that he had a funeral at Lawndale and had the casket and everything laid out, and you had to go through it. And I don't know, possibly it might have been the first piece of installation / performance I'd ever seen, but it was very meaningful to me when I saw that. That was one of the first pieces I really remember.
There are many shows on it. It's very hard to pick one, but the first time I saw Clyde Connell's work at Lawndale was just breathtaking and very exciting. This was a woman who came into her full creative powers in her mid-70s, and to listen to her stories and to see that wonderful art was truly amazing. And another breathtaking show was the Frida Kahlo show at the Blafford in 1978. And I remember seeing those paintings, and particularly the one of her giving birth to herself and being knocked against the wall, because no one had ever painted that way, and no one had painted my nurse and me that way either. And you know, it was just a totally amazing exhibition.
I'll talk just a minute about the Anthony Braxton concert, because it was one of the things that a whole lot of the Lawndale people participated in. I think Jack Massig's here, I believe he had a part of it, Ed Wilson. And James Surls had delegated the students to do puppets. They were going to be 30 foot tall, and they were going to be choreographed to move along with Anthony Braxton's orchestra. Being, young students, we didn't give near the proper attention, I suppose we should have, to how serious this was as far as a performance. We took it a little lightheartedly. I think Ed Wilson did a wonderful job with the bird, but they had put Judy Long and me in charge of the sun goddess. And the sun goddess, we were both painting students. We didn't, either one of us, know anything about sculpture or putting anything together at all. So she said, well, let's do a soft sculpture. Soft sculpture was good at that time. She said, I will sew the sun goddess and bring it up here, and then we'll start to decorate it. Well, when she brought it up here, it was 30 foot tall. It was this gigantic, naked pink woman with a huge vulva. Right up, and it was painted bright pink. Everything. And Mark Coughlin had made a head that would spin around in a circle. I mean, it was just really hysterical. It's very hard to describe this. Well, we had a huge meeting. Anthony Braxton was not very happy with this when he saw it. So we had this huge meeting, we were going to get finally we decided to paint it gold and kind of cover up some of the parts that were so offensive. But it also had 8 arms, and we had pulleys and strings and this beautiful score that Anthony Braxton had written down. We were up in the loft. There was about 5 or 6 students, and we were supposed to be pulling the strings, reading this choreographed thing all as it went. So I don't know, at least 10 minutes into the show, we lost our place, and the arms were slapping against each other, and the head was spinning like crazy. And I mean, later I look back at it and I think, what a wonderful opportunity to work with Anthony Braxton. And yeah, we just, we're totally lost at doing whatever crazy, dumb stuff we were doing. But I do remember that as an experience. I'm sure some of the people that worked on the bird have a totally different experience, because it was nice and it was serious and it looked good. The sculpture students pulled it off. So.
when the art building at the University of Houston opened, there was an opening exhibition of works from the Blacker Foundation. I was then asked by Dr. Peter Gunter if I would be interested in preparing the next year's exhibitions, and I said, what is the budget? And he said, well, Vice President Nicholson said that his office can offer you $17,000 for the year, and that included Mike Medico's salary as guard. And so I sat with a few people and tried to put together something of a year that would be worthwhile. What was the most worthwhile was a reinstitution of the Houston area exhibition, which we had, I guess it was in 1974 at the Blabber Gallery. Had 3 jurors: Richard Hunt from Chicago, Pat Adams from Bennington College, and the William Middleton, who is curator of contemporary art at the Dallas Museum of Art. And each one of these 3 jurors selected their own exhibitions based on a form that I was familiar with in Chicago for the Momentum Mid-Continental exhibitions, which occurred in the 50s, that I was able to participate in. The exhibition, I didn't have any money to give anyone, but I felt as though I can't ask people for things, but I was fairly close to Nina Cullinan, and I went to her and asked if she would give a prize, and she gave me $1,000 to give to for the first prize, which went to Pat Colville. The second prize went to Earl Staley, and we gave an exhibition of his cactus watercolors at the Blaffer Gallery. The third prize went to Joe Tate, right? Wasn't? No, it was someone at Rice. It was an installation in the big room. It was at the same time as your show. Is it like the garden out of doors?
The backyard show.
The backyard.
Joe's backyard?
Yeah, Joe's backyard.
That was at St. Thomas.
Well, it was also at the Blaffer Gallery. It was a new showing, and the 4 honorable mentions were people who became very significant to this town. Suzanne Mans, who we gave a show to in the balcony. Robin Utterback, who proved to be everything that we knew he would be. Fletcher Mackey and Michael Hollis. And these were all first exhibitions, museum exhibitions for these 4 people. And I thought that was very, very significant. And the way it was juried was significant, and it was a large exhibition. Many people came. It really brought a lot of attention to the university, but something that needed to be done. All of us still believe, where can you see our art hanging all the time in this city? Nowhere. And even today, nowhere. We need a museum of this city now, before it's lost.
Well, my things are eclectic, and it's hard to remember, and it's fun to sort of think about them. I guess the first one would be overwhelming thing I saw was when I went to the University of Houston, the Blaffer, and saw the Frida Kahlo show for the first time. And I had been to Mexico, seen her house, but I had not really seen her paintings. So I remember talking to the director, who was a friend of mine, whose name is, do you all remember the director out at the Blaffer?
Bill Robinson.
Bill Robinson. Anyway, so I went with a girlfriend, and I said, let's go talk to the director and find out what's the story on this woman. And Bill said, now don't get too excited, you girls. I know these look like little paintings, but these are not paintings. These are paintings that really are patrimony of the country of Mexico. And he went into a lot of detail. It was wonderful to hear his explanation of the pictures, and they were really foreign to us. And but it was a big influence on me. Another one that I really loved is not Sui at the little teeny gallery at Rice University that I can't remember her last name. I can get it not.
Davenport.
Kim Davenport runs the Site Gallery, which does these beautiful pictures, beautiful installations. Not very many, but they're so well done and they are so engaging. So that's another one. And I think seeing my first Wolfley show at an outsider museum in Geneva was really overwhelming and moving. So it's not any one thing.
I want to say just one more thing about the nature of this town. I think there is been enough evidence that there is something afoot here in the way of something that not only is a place for us to live and work, but there is a certain particular character of Houston, Texas, which it distinguishes it from any other place. Just as the writing of Larry McMurtry and William Goyen and Carmen McCarthy and Terry Southern distinguished Texas writing from writing in any other place. And I think that's something that's very valuable and needs to be thought through and addressed in many different ways. Anne has seen this in the photography that's come out of the city thanks to the efforts in these areas early on, which she's had a lot to do with. That's certainly true in all of the arts.
I really don't have any particular gallery shows I remember, except anything the Manils did was wonderful. And that great show called The Machine is Art, which got here from the Museum of Modern Art and was put at Rice University with the great mud tub of Rauschenberg. That was an incredible show. But I'll say one thing about Houston is always I liked it because we are set apart from the rest of the United States. Whatever happens in New York or happens in LA, I just say forget about it. They're not going to come down. The few times that they came down here, it was nice, but they were totally forgotten, more or less, I guess. I don't know, but which leaves us very free to do what we want to do. Unfortunately, for us who show in galleries or attempt to show in galleries, we are lacking patrons, but the patronage has always been a problem since I first got here. There's been a lot of galleries, there's a lot of lip service, there's a lot of people going to galleries, but who's buying the work? None of us as artists can afford to live off of our art. Thank goodness I've survived by teaching school. I refuse to retire because I can't give up my lifestyle. But it's thank goodness for teaching. Unfortunately for younger people, now the jobs aren't there. I got here when the jobs were there. But this has always been a problem of patronage and people putting their money down on art or major collectors in the state or in the town. But it's nice now that museums, at least the Contemporary Arts Museum, is paying attention to local artists. We went through a long time, the tenure between Jim Harithas and Bill Arning, there was not much attention at all paid to any artist here. So now I say thank you to Jim and thank you to Bill, that at least you pay attention to us and are showing some of the artists. The other, of course, is always the problem that we have is, where is the work on the museum walls? It's not there. There are stuff collected, but if it's collected, it ends up in storage. So there doesn't seem to be any of that going on. So that's another eternal question and problem that all artists working in the town have.
I just wanted to say one thing, which was, when I came to Houston, I was so happy to come to Texas, let me tell you. I couldn't have been happier. It could have been any place in the world, but Texas was the place of my own dreams when I was a kid, because when I grew up, it wasn't cowboys and Indians, it was the Mexican Revolution, and Texas was close enough to that to excite me. Anyways, but when I came down here, I had just done a series of exhibition of women. I'd done Yoko Ono, Joan Mitchell, Lane Sturdivant, and all people who have become kind of well-known now. Marilyn Minter. I'd done a whole series of exhibitions and gotten very little response out of it. So, and I was a little bit shocked about that, because the women's movement, which was the late 60s that I became really aware of it, I thought, well, my God, this is the moment when we'll really see great women working. So I organized a conference that was really devoted to the idea that we're going to talk about and show women. And the first person to make a comment at that thing, the conference, said, "Why are you devoting this conference to women? The men get exactly the same breaks as the women in this community." And that gave me a start, really, because I realized it was true. The men were getting a little bit of attention, but not real attention. And they weren't getting the kind of attention they should have been getting from the major museums, or even lip service. And the other thing that disturbed me was that we were so close to Mexico, and it's still true. With the exception of one or two shows you've mentioned, when did you ever hear about a Mexican show? Or a Chicano show? You never hear about one. It's a whole area of the population's been left out, and it's still open. It's still another area that we have to take seriously. That's all. Thank you.
I'd like to say that Jim's show on the border and on the violence of the border is in the top 10 of my lifetime human experiences of art viscerally affecting me and changing my understanding of something.
Well, if anybody has anything else, or
There's just one other show that I would like to talk about that I think was very significant at the time. It was in 1977 when the International Women's Conference was held for the very first time in Houston. And there were many, many significant leaders of our country here at that time. And in conjunction with that show, the mayor chose 4 women. I was included. Diane Rudy, Gertrude Barnstone, and Trudy Sween were asked to curate a show of women's art. And that was to be held at the Alley Theater. And that was really, as I understand it, the first women's show in Houston. And it was after that that the caucus began, and a lot of women began coming together and really becoming a powerful entity in the community. So I just wanted to mention that because it was a very exciting time for all of us.
Jim put a show in the CAMH downstairs during that conference, and I should have mentioned that. And I think it was the first show of women artists in the museum in Houston. But that provoked a lot of good things.
I think you should hear from a young man who came here, visited here from Santa Fe, who grew up here. He started when he was 15 or 16, hanging around myself and Dave Folkman and Bob Camblin, and then he hung around with the Surls and everybody else. So he could have some interesting things to say. Don Redmond.
Hey, Don.
Hey. I've got a good Harithas story. I was in HSPVA with a high school with performing and visual arts, and I was getting reprimanded by some people who were running the art department. And they said, hold on just a second, we've got to go to the other room for a minute. So there's a partition in the room, and one of the academics that was teaching drawing class had given Jim's oldest daughter a bad grade in drawing.
Failed.
Failed her in drawing. And they had barraged me for about 45 minutes about something I hadn't done. And I sat there and I said, anyway, so they stopped my meeting and they went next door. And all of a sudden I heard this booming voice. If you knew anything about art, which you obviously know nothing about art, you would not give this child an F in drawing. And I sat there, and that was my introduction to Harithas.
Well, the poor child had done 300 drawings. She's been working night and day. Because they were all terrible.
But I sat there giggling because these people who were judging me just got their asses tore apart. But one thing I can say about Houston is, growing up in the art world here, there was all these different factions that were all blooming at the same time. Very few people were brought into any of the groupings. But as a kid, I was able to go through all of them and see a lot of the different perspectives on them. Whether it was DiverseWorks, Midtown, Lawndale, and everybody was striving for the best art they could create out of very minimum means. And there was a synergy that all these different clusters produced an overall foray of the production of art. And so I think we're all some sort of layer, generation after generation. So it's going to be interesting to see if this town is still left in 200 years what it's producing. Salute.
One thing that I think remains true, and is really important, that during a time this period of time that was very exciting, and we were all contributing everything we could in our own ways. We didn't have anyone hanging over our shoulders. Susie Khalil just finished a book on Dorothy Hood's, and there'll be a retrospective in Corpus Christi. It's an amazing story. And one of the things that Dorothy, who had opportunities in New York and to be in New York and to stay in New York, but clearly stated to many of us during her declining years in Houston, was that she felt free here. There's a sense of freedom to create here. And there's a sense of being able to do your own art and not have to be a part of a school or an ISM or anything else. And risk-taking in the community. I mean, you could see it in just the slides and just the shenanigans and the fun. But risks were being taken by all the institutions, and people were just coming together in a way that haven't done that since. I mean, I am feeling really bad that the Dorothy Hood show has been turned down by every institution in the city. And that, if Dorothy Hood can't have her work shown, who in the hell can amongst us?
Okay.
I mean, it's really disgusting, folks.
Anybody else?
So why didn't the CAMH take Dorothy Hood on?
I think there's been a great legacy that has been started in Houston from all of the things that you've begun from further back than 1972. But you still see it today in Houston. There's a lot of great things happening in the city. I think there's a participation amongst young people that I haven't seen since I was in school. And perhaps it's because I'm back and being involved a little bit more, but it seems like that there is some excitement boiling again. I know you talked about, sad that there's not a lot of regional work going on. I know the Art League is showing all regional stuff and really bringing in a community that's underserved most of the time. There's also lots of other beginning nonprofits struggling, and they all look up to all of these things. They look up to Lawndale, they look up to the Orange Show, they look up to DiverseWorks, they look up to the Women's Caucus. And it's a regionalism of sorts and a freedom that I think everybody wants to continue seeing Houston thrive that way.
The Art Car Museum.
And the Art Car Museum, of course.
Oh, so
I work for the Art League, so I had to put them in.
Okay, so and my favorite show is the Art Car show. So you need to have that in the list of really strange taste. That's it. Me in the city. Art Car.
All right, well, unless anybody has anything else, I want to thank our panel. Earl Staley, Marilyn Oshman, Richard Stout, Alison, Lynn Randolph, also Don Redmond, Roberta Harris, Ann Wilkes Tucker, Jim Harithas. Please, if you were around during this era, please come find me and keep in touch with me because I want to know everything. Thank you.